Hey, everybody. Today I'm with Zoe Cunningham, and we're talking about investing in culture. Zoe, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, sure. So I've been working in technology for over 25 years now. And I started as a computer programmer straight out of university. So I did a mathematics degree, and then started as a coder back in 2000. And I'm the kind of person that I get bored quickly and I like to do new things. So from being a
Me
software
too.
developer, I went on to trying to do every single different job within the organization. So I ran recruitment for a bit, I did project management, I became a consultant, and then I did a really big jump that was very far outside of my comfort zone, but I therefore consequently learnt the most from it, which was moving to the business development team. I had to learn a whole bunch of new skills, particularly people skills, which are the most valuable skills that I have learned. Like any piece of tech knowledge that you have, like I think knowing how to approach technical problems is important, but any specific tech knowledge you can always relearn and it goes out of date anyway. Whereas how to deal with people, I think is going to become more and more important going forward. Anyway, I use these newfound skills to actually take on the top job at Softwire, where I've actually worked at Softwire my whole career, and I was managing director, so running the whole organization from 2012 to 2020. And now I'm still at Softwire and I do outreach, podcasts like this, internal mentoring, generally being useful.
I've been where you are in some of the stages that you've been through. And it just, as you're talking, I was just imagining how cool it would be to be able to go back in time with everything that you know now about people, about management and about culture building, and go back to one of those previous positions. Like, how well could you rock that position?
Yes. Well, I've learned some even more basic things that when I look back. So my first big learning was actually in 2006, I moved to Australia and I carried on working remotely for my organization because it's a company that really focuses on supporting employees, and that was there from the start. However, I discovered that everyone I would usually ask for help was asleep when I needed help. And I ended up having a big lesson in self-efficacy. I don't know if that's a word that you've come across before. It basically means your belief in your ability to make a difference. So I went from like drifting life to kind of working out that I could solve things on my own. And I came back to the UK, and I actually feel like that was the point where I learned about hard work and, oh, if I work harder, I do better. And I feel to go back, oh my God, to go back to school and have that attitude, imagine what I could have done.
School's another one. If I could go back to school with the amount that I actually care now, then I'd probably be a better student.
Being able to choose.
When I was in school, I just didn't care.
Right, but choose what to care about. I think that children are told to care rather than encouraged to care, or rather than adults looking at what they do already care about. Whereas I think that one of the key skills as an adult is you go, oh, I really care about this. I really want to learn this. Oh, this, not so much. And despite what the adults say, it doesn't actually matter.
Yeah, because it's more about the process of how we learn to learn than exactly the thing that we're learning.
Right.
In so many cases.
Right. How to set your own objectives. A lot of it is the stuff they just don't teach in school.
Yeah. And that a lot of that actually translates back to us as adults in the workforce. If we know how to learn and know how to acquire skills, we don't necessarily need a path or a course on that specific skill, because we could just go and learn it on our own if we just know how to learn.
Yeah, exactly. And learning, I'm a big believer in learning by doing. I think that's really important. And I think that book learning can never translate. If you learn from a book, you still have to then do some doing before you've properly learned it.
Yeah. Now, what we're talking about right now only indirectly has to do with what we're talking about in the rest of this episode, which is fine. That's one thing I love about these conversations that we get to have in this podcast, is that it's just, we're going to talk about what we talk about, and it's all good. But just in case anybody is just tuning in, I want to make sure that you all know that today we're talking about investing in your culture. And Zoe has 5 stages of culture building that we're going to get to talk about here in just a few minutes. But before we go there, Zoe, I'm always interested in what tech leaders are reading. So is there a book that you've been reading lately that has made an impact on how you think or how you lead or anything?
Yes, I'm a big believer in reading books and getting new ideas and new ways to do things. But actually, the book that I'm reading at the moment, I am rereading. And it's a book that I have reread many times because it has been the most impactful book, I would say, on my leadership style. And it's called Nonviolent Communication, which the title appealed to me to start with. However, I found it a really applicable kind of way to break down communication and understand what people are saying and understand how to get your point across, but also how to interpret. So I find there's a lot of guides to communication where it's, if we all talk like this, it will be okay. Whereas this book is like, no one else needs to change anything. You can do it on your own. So you can change how you communicate, and then you can use the framework to parse what's coming back to you and go, oh, okay, you're saying this, but actually I can interpret that as this, and then I respond to it better.
Yeah, that actually sounds awesome. And even the title gets my attention because sometimes our communication can maybe come off as a bit violent. I don't know, maybe not physically violent, but sometimes we can really put people through the ringer with our communication. Yeah, I'm going to check that book out. In fact, I'm probably going to, while we're talking, I'm probably going to get on Amazon and go ahead and buy it. I can't wait. So I love adding to my book list. Okay, before we go on, I also want to make sure that everybody realizes just how human we are. It's important to remember that we have been there and done that and made our mistakes. That's how we got to where we are. It's confession time. So Zoe, step into my confession booth. Tell me your most embarrassing mistake that you have made as a tech leader.
Yeah, so this is actually a super basic mistake. And actually, I think that like making that as a leader, when you would perhaps not expect people to work for you to do it, makes it like extra embarrassing. But I was once looking into, or in fact, I think I was doing like a regular system upgrade on a client server, and we'd take a site down to do this upgrade. And while I was installing the new software, a little pop-up came up saying, new version of SQL Server, install yes, no. And I clicked yes. And you know that feeling when you click the button and it's like, almost as you're clicking it, you're like, no, wait, what am I doing? Is this a good idea? So I clicked this button to reinstall, do an unplanned reinstall of SQL Server. And sure enough, it failed. So it got halfway through, it basically took it off and then it didn't want to put it back on again. Now, usually I'm the kind of person who I'm really good at asking for help and going, look, I made a mistake. Everyone makes a mistake. But this mistake was so stupid. I just felt like I can't own up and tell anyone about this, which I guess was like a second mistake and a compounding mistake, because although in the end I did, after a couple of hours of, okay, what do I try? I did manage to get the server sorted out and back up with the upgrade. Everyone's happy. The website's working. There could have been a situation where I was essentially, because of my pride really in not wanting to own up to it, I was impacting the technical performance of my client's business, which is not actually very cool when you think about it.
Yeah, sometimes when I thank you for that story, by the way, and we can come out of the confession booth. Sometimes when I ask that question, I ask it to developers and I'll ask them, okay, what's the most embarrassing thing or the worst thing you've done in code? And they'll talk about an Easter egg that they left or a comment that they left in the code about somebody on their team or something like that. And we all do things like that too with these little like hidden mistakes that we make, where we make a mistake and we don't want to own up to it. And it might affect people either today or later on, hoping that nobody ever finds out, or maybe by then we've already moved on and they won't remember us. But then I remember that there's things like LinkedIn and podcasts like this that draw out secrets.
Exactly.
So eventually it will all come to light.
The thing is, you say that though, our technical director at Softwire actually did a fantastic, and we have these things called lunch and learns where you essentially share learnings on different topics to help knowledge share and train up the rest of the company. And he did one on like all of the things that he'd done wrong. And it was so impactful and so empowering. Like, actually, talking back to what advice would you give your younger self, I'd be like, write down all your mistakes because you'll need them later. You'll need to be able to tell other people about them.
Yeah, that is so true. Let's talk about human flourishing, because that's what this podcast is really about. Is we're trying to equip tech leaders with ways to promote human flourishing in their teams. We're talking about building culture and investing in culture today. So what does investment, or my investment in culture, your investment in culture, have to do with human flourishing? It's kind of like a no-brainer question, but I'm really interested to hear your insights.
Yeah, I think that actually there's a very clear analogy for how a culture relates to human flourishing, because we can look at plant flourishing and the concept of soil relating to plant flourishing. And actually, plants are pretty tenacious and they will grow in all kinds of crazy places, in all kinds of different environments. But some of those plants, it's hard to say that they're flourishing. To get a plant to flourish, you really need soft. I'm not a gardener, so actually, I'm going to start failing to say what the soil needs in it. But you need some nice, fluffy, brown, like nutrient-dense soil with plenty of water in it. And that's what will cause your plant to flourish. So although you're not changing anything about the plant itself, but the environment that you put it in has a huge impact on that plant's ability to flourish. So that's how I see culture. It's not about training or direct skills transfer or what role people are given. It's about the environment that they're in. And that's hugely, in my experience, I've seen this be hugely impactful.
I appreciate some of the points that you made just now. One of them is there is a difference between growth and flourishing. You can grow and not flourish. Mm-hmm. I think that's an important distinction, because we might think that if we can help people grow, that we have done our job. And if they grow, then they must be flourishing. But as we can see with a flower, like my wife's rose bushes right now, they are surrounded by weeds. And those weeds, the rose bushes themselves, are not covered in flowers like they used to be a few years ago. They have weeds around them right now. And so you can see the results. They've grown, they got taller, but there are less flowers, which is like the idea of flourishing. They haven't flourished. And if we stop at growth, then we might be cutting our people short. Same thing with happiness, right? Happiness is not always flourishing.
Right.
Because a plant can grow up really fast, lots of buds all over it, but very shallow roots. It's too easy to yank up out of the ground and ruin, or maybe it just gets blown over by the wind. It's not all that great. So what are some examples for you that you have in your own experience where human flourishing really trumps some of these other components?
Something else that I'm a big believer in, and I feel informs my leadership style, is win-win. Like, I think win-win is such an important way to view interactions with other human beings. So rather than, I think a lot of leaders tend to think like, how do I get people to do what I want? And that's good and proper, because that is your job, is to set the vision and get people to do what you want. And I found changing that to, how do I get people to achieve what I want by doing what they want, is a really powerful way, of making sure that you're always winning. So I think that a lot of the framing around investing in culture it's like investing in culture versus. It's like you're investing in culture, or you're investing in new servers, or you're investing in higher salaries. And I think that culture done best is where it's because it's about getting the right culture for the organization. And that's very very linked to business objective and business realities, as well as it's not about making a play park for software developers. That's not what you're trying to achieve. You're trying to achieve the environment, and perhaps they would flourish in some senses within that environment. But actually, I don't think they would they wouldn't have the same sense of achievement that comes from flourishing in a business environment. It's a very different type of flourishing. And we actually, at the end of the day, we all know the difference in feeling in ourselves between working for a living and being given charity. And if what you're providing with developers is not linked to the business objective, you're not giving them the opportunity to earn their living.
Yeah, I give my developers, my tech team, a play park, and all they do is play. They won't be happy in a few weeks when our revenue dries up and we have to let them all go. Yeah, sometimes it's a win. You have to look for the win-win, not just the win. And nobody else. Yeah, we have to look for flourishing on all sides. I was actually talking with my team about this the other day, that it's not just about making the tech team flourish, but it's also about helping the business to flourish. It's about helping our clients to flourish. It is even down to recruiting the candidates. We don't want just the people that we hire to flourish. We actually want our candidates to flourish as well, which means that in the recruiting and the vetting process, we reach them with messaging that is respectful, and we let them know in a timely manner about what they should expect to hear later on, or we give them updates. We don't leave them hanging or dying on the vine while we are having fun over here and flourishing, just us.
I believe in that so strongly. I'm really excited to hear you say that, because I find not enough organizations take that approach. And I think I think your responsibility as an organization extends beyond just, like you say, your immediate, or in fact, the way I see it is it extends beyond people who are immediately useful to you. I find a lot of people, they're quite cynical in terms of, you're immediately useful to me, so I'll reply to your email, and you are not immediately useful to me, or I don't expect you to be useful to me, so I'm not going to reply to your email.
I think that the reason why the term investing in culture is actually the right thing to say is because if you invest in something, you are taking a risk. You are putting money or resources into something that may pan out or it may not. But you invest in that thing because you're willing to take the risk. And if you only pour into people that actually can pour back into you, you're not taking any risks. And so I think that in that case, the return on your investment is going to be a lot lower. Just like in the financial market, if you invest in things that are low risk, you shouldn't expect a very high return. But if you are willing to take some risks, you should expect a higher return. And that's the way it is with people. If we invest only in the people that can pay us back right away, we're going to get very little back on that return. But if we invest in even the people that can't immediately influence or impact us, then from a I get what I want perspective, that will eventually come back to you. If you believe in karma, that might be what it is, or there's something else that's going on there in the world that is rewarding us for taking risks in people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that we are part of a community, and that, like you say, pay it forward, you help someone out, they will help someone else out. It makes everything better. I also think, though, part of the reason I believe so strongly in things like treating candidates well, even if they don't get the job, is that I think that our behavior doesn't just affect the people who are the recipients of it, it also affects us. And so I think that while there's no direct benefit necessarily of treating a candidate well, although they might remember you fondly, they might refer their friends, you might work with them in the future, they might become a client in the future. So there could be benefits, but even if there aren't, I think there is an immediate benefit because of the effect on you of how you behave and what kind of person kind of strengthens the kind of person you are, which is of direct benefit to you interacting with the people who can immediately pay you back.
Yeah. Well, and then extend it out from there, even in your team, by having that conversation with my team about how we want even our candidates to flourish. That value that we have discovered in our company is actually a core value, is strengthened and more embedded in that team. And so that begins to have an effect on our culture as a whole. So the benefits are all over the place. We just have to be willing to take risks. And that actually leads me into my next question for you. Why don't you think more leaders invest in culture?
I think this is a question with a lot of different answers that kind of sit at different levels. I think that truth is a very, when it comes to human beings, right? Like the truth of human beings is very complex and multifaceted, and actually particularly reasons for why we do things. And I think that there's reasons that sit at very different levels. So I think the kind of most surface level reason is that, as you're saying, there are people who they see it as a like a win-lose. If I'm doing this, I'm not doing something else. They perhaps actively think it's not the best use of their time, that their job is to increase shareholder value, for example. That's a common belief that people have, and that should be prioritized over everything else. So I think there are still, I disagree with that attitude based on my experience. Like, I don't think it's something, can argue against it and you can show numbers, but at the end of the day, that's not the reason I disagree with it. I disagree with it because of my experience of how I find I can best deliver shareholder value. So I think that's the kind of first reason. The second level reason is that I think a lot of people would say they don't do it because they're too busy. And being too busy is something that affects all of us all the time, I find, in a modern working environment. Like, we never have enough time to do all of the things that we want to do. And so back to talking about investment, it's not just necessarily about investing money or investing the kind of resources that you control. It's actually when it comes down to investing your own personal time that is in such limited supply, it can be really hard to choose to prioritize this. And I think it's particularly hard because you have to do it yourself. If you're building a relationship and you're setting the culture, you can't outsource that. You can't hand that over to someone else. It just doesn't work like that. So I do think that there are a lot of people who are too busy. They wish they accept the value. They would love to invest in it. They think it's going to pay returns in the long term, but they just can't manage it. But that brings me on to the third level. And the third level is that sometimes things we don't do because we're too busy are things that we actually don't want to do for some reason, in particular emotional reasons. And I think that setting up great culture and being authentic with other human beings, it involves putting yourself on the line a little bit. It involves taking personal risks. Not just risks of, I spent 5 minutes talking to you and I could have done this. It involves being vulnerable as a human being, and that is uncomfortable in the moment. And obviously, you're giving someone else the power over you to abuse that vulnerability in the future. So I think those are my 3 levels of why people don't do it. I'll give you any one of those answers depending on what level you want to talk about it.
So let's just assume, I think it's a fairly safe assumption, that if our listeners have made it this far, that they actually do want to build culture, that they actually do genuinely want to invest in human flourishing. And they are wondering at this point, or maybe they've even tried something before and it fell flat on its face, or they're in the process and they're really trying to make sure that they do things right. You've got a bit of a framework or something that has worked for you, and you might be able to share that with us. You were talking to me earlier about the stages of culture building. So tell me, let's start with the first one, trust and listening. Start there and let's help our audience understand how can they begin building and investing in their culture.
Sure. Can I just give a bit of background about how I uncovered this framework? I wouldn't say I made up this framework, but it's something that stage became increasingly apparent to me as I did the first stage, and then I learned about the second stage. It's like my learning through my leadership journey as well. Yeah, trust and listening is, I think, for me, it's stage 1 because it's absolutely fundamental to building a good culture. It doesn't matter what else you do. If you don't have trust within your team and between you, yourself, and your team members, anything else that you do is going to have really limited impact. Part of the reason it's trust and listening is that it's also about having this 2-way communication channel. So it's not just You have a team. There's a question actually in a survey that we do that says, my manager does a lot of telling and not a lot of listening. That's what you're trying to avoid. You want to be listening and taking ideas from people in your team and actioning those ideas and like giving them your time to facilitate that communication. So for me, this is stage one because it's the absolute bedrock and there's no point. You're trying to build on that unless you have it.
So one of the reasons why I totally agree that listening and trust go hand in hand is because if you're a leader, it can be a little bit scary to put yourself out there and ask your people, what do you think about me? Or things go, how am I doing as a leader? What do you like about your job? Whatever these questions might be that we might have in a one-on-one meeting or in a survey, it's really, we're putting ourselves out there as leaders, this thing that we've built or this baby that we have brought into the world. And then we're asking them if it's ugly. And it requires trust on our part as leaders. We trust our people to tell us honestly, but lovingly about our ugly baby. And I love that you put those together because it really does require a lot of trust. And I think the same thing goes from our people back towards us and even each other. Everybody needs to be able to trust whoever's listening to them to listen and to love back and be honest and also be willing to listen.
And to not be defensive. Like we've all had that experience of someone asking for feedback. You give them the feedback and suddenly like they don't take it very well. And you're like, okay, I've just put myself on the line giving you that feedback and they don't want to take it. Yeah, totally. Exactly what you're saying.
Yeah. So what about perks?
Yeah, I've put perks as stage 2 because it's something we always had within Softwire, within our organization. We care a lot about our software developers. It's kind of part of our business strategy. Perks also is what I find a lot of other people, it's what a lot of people think is culture. They think it's the unlimited chocolate biscuits or the having a kitchen in the office or having like
the ping pong
trips
table.
out. Sorry? Ping pong.
The ping pong table.
Yeah, exactly. I actually, I have people kind of coming to me and saying, we've put a ping pong table in the office. Why is everyone not happy? or in fact, I put
a ping pong table. Why does my culture still suck?
Right, exactly. In fact, we were recognised at Softwire last year. We were awarded the best company to work for in the UK. Number one. We've placed on the list like every single year since we've entered, but this year we were number one, which is very exciting. But it does mean a lot of companies look to that and they come and ask me questions. They do genuinely come and ask me questions and say, what do I do? And I had someone come to me and say, oh, we've built this recreation room and the developers are allowed to use it between 10 and 10:15 every day and then between 3 and 3:15 every day. And no one uses it and no one's happier. And I feel like if you think about culture and trust and how people want to make their own decisions, it's quite clear that part of the benefit of having a pool table is that you're saying, I trust you to take a break when you want to use that wisely and still work to achieve our business objective, not I am rewarding you with 5 minutes off from your factory job. It's a very different vibe to it. For me, perks is stage 2 because it's quite a basic level. If you get it, and so 1, you can get it wrong. But 2, even if you get it right, I think there's a lot more you can do.
Okay. How about enjoying our work?
For example, having trips out like jollies out, lots of people going go-karting and getting out of the office to go and do something different. Actually, that's by definition saying this is a day in which we're having fun, whereas every other day we're not having fun. And there's no way to make a business where that's going to square, where you can just have non-work related fun every single day. That's not a business. If you can create and shape the project, the type of work that people are doing so that it's more enjoyable, that will give you much more value than whatever perks you add. There is no perk you can add that will be as good as crafting people's jobs. And part of that actually is about matching people to jobs. So all of us have different skills, different talents, different things we enjoy. And so part of making There are things you can do. Having a really slow build server that's frustrating and everyone spends the whole time like having to deal with that. There are things you can do for everyone, but also you can do things for individuals and match individuals with work that suits them best.
Yeah, I mean, you can, to help people in your organization flourish, you might just be removing friction, which is a great way. That's certainly something that we should be doing. It's a good place to start. But what you mentioned also, putting the right people in the right seats, helping people to find or to work on things that is better suited for their capacity, for their experience. One thing that always affects my enjoyment of a task is my mastery of the abilities that I need to be able to do that task. And if I'm not good at what I'm doing, or if I'm having to move from ability to ability so fast that I never have the ability to actually build up mastery, that also affects how I enjoy my work. So I had to learn that the hard way. I had some employees that would come to me and say, look, you're moving me from one thing to the next so fast, I never actually get to build up any mastery and I can't enjoy my work. And so it was a light bulb moment. I realized
well, that's really
what
interesting.
I had to do.
Because that is stage 4.
Yeah. So I was going to give you a nice, clean segue. But yeah, how do we help people? So enjoying work is where you are. It's what you told me before. And career development and building mastery is where we want to go. So what's your take on career development?
Yeah. So I think that for me, this learning came about in the teeth of listening to people, that some people are ambitious and they know where they want to go, or they are happy to say, how can I develop myself and respond to what they're offered? That's somewhere they want to go already. But I actually had conversations with people who said, I'm not ambitious. I'm really happy with what I'm doing. I don't want a promotion. I don't want any more stress. Just leave me here doing what I do and I'll be happy. And I found that without exception, that was not true. I think it's actually an innate human need to feel that sense of growth and development. And that can take many different forms. So for some people, it might be the traditional career development. But for others, it is this sense of mastery. It is this, I can now code better than I could before, or I can code in more different environments than I could before and create different kinds of outputs. I can use my skills in different ways. There are actually unlimited ways we can develop and explore our potential. And I think that making sure that is part of people's plans, where it's responding to what they enjoy, not just what the company needs or what you need to do to earn more money, is really important. It's almost like you're establishing this link between what you're doing now and where you're going in the future. So I think that it actually makes your already enjoyable day-to-day work, if you did stage 3, even more enjoyable to have this appreciation of where you've come from and what you've learned already, and then to see where you're going in the future.
I'll bet that person that may or may not have said that they don't really want career development or growth.
Right.
I'll bet that they actually thought we were talking about climbing the career ladder, because so many technologists are introverts, or they're just not interested in leadership. And we should never assume that they are headed there, because I think some of the worst mistakes have been made in the history of management, where we take a very capable technologist and we sit them in a supervisor's chair and ruin their lives and everybody else's. And that's not really what we mean by career development. It's maybe about that. That might be where they really want to go, but it's also about just helping them grow in the way that they need to so that they can flourish.
Right.
That's back to the plant analogy. You can help a plant to flourish truly by helping it to grow in the way that it needs to grow.
Right. Depending on where its own personal light source is. Some of us are growing in that direction and some of us are growing in that direction.
And it also has something to do with their purpose, which is your 5th stage. So tell us about purpose and how it plays into this.
So the way that these, like I say, for me, I learned it sequentially. But the reason I like I describe it as the 5 stages of culture, is I think that everyone builds on the one prior. So I think that purpose is, again, something that builds on having interesting work. And it builds on having interesting work where you're developing yourself. And again, it just changes your perspective on what you're doing. So by purpose, that sense that what you're doing is worthwhile. And again, lots of different people have lots of different things that give them purpose. For some people, you would maybe call them more craftspeople, crafting a beautiful piece of code is a purpose. It's something that has value and merit in and of itself. Whereas for others, like the crafting of a business and the crafting of the helping an organization grow and flourish, and that's purpose. Whereas for some people, the outcome of what they're doing is really important. And for me, I actually found this almost cyclical sense of purpose of creating this culture to help developers explore their own sense of purpose and mastery and so on.
I suppose that this concept of purpose can actually go back to the beginning as well for the leadership, because your individual contributors, your people may have a purpose that eventually develops and it eventually materializes for that person. They realize what their purpose is. And we as leaders may be able to help them develop an awareness of that purpose. But it may also be something that we can plant at the very beginning, making this a kind of a cyclical. We may have as leaders, I certainly do. I know I do. I have a purpose or even a set of purposes that guide me into wanting to build an environment and a culture of trust and listening. So I'll bet all of these things, just you're constantly having to go back to these things and reiterate and cycle through.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that for me, well, everything is this combination of innate. Like I think we have innate senses of purpose and innate needs as human beings. And they're also developed and learnt from our environment, that actually, if you're in an organization, for me, I feel like I learned about doing, or did I? See, and also sometimes you can't tell. I was about to say I learned about doing a great job from clients from working in an organization that did it. But actually, I think it's more enjoyable to do a great job than to do a terrible job. Just for everyone, it's always more enjoyable.
Yes. And that's what this podcast is all about, is helping tech leaders to do a better job and enjoy their job as they're doing it. And I'm convinced that human flourishing is one of the best goals that any of us should have in our own teams. So Zoe, from your perspective, what's one thing that tech leaders anywhere around the world should do starting tomorrow to improve and promote team flourishing?
Your last comment just made me think of something, which is perfect timing for this question, because I think that what one thing tech leaders can do is to think about and focus on their own flourishing, because you are part of your team too. You are people too. You are as worthy of flourishing and development and enjoyment as anyone else. And you have the ability to put yourself into the right kind of roles that work for you and do the right kind of jobs. And by doing that, you will role model this behavior of how to cultivate your own flourishing to the rest of your team. So by doing it for yourself, you'll underline that it really matters to you and that you're serious and that you really care. And also you'll show them how to do it and what options are available. And so rather than you, again, for me, this is such a win-win solution, rather than just being like, God, I've got to work myself to the bone every day, making sure my developers are happy and flourishing and I go home exhausted. Actually, you can combine both and do it better.
Well said, Zoe. How can people get closer to you, connect with you, work with you? What should our audience do to learn more?
Sure. So LinkedIn is super easy way to connect with me. I'm Zoe Cunningham. I think my handle is Zoe F Cunningham, which is my middle initial. If you're interested in specifically my thoughts on leadership, I actually released a book called Galvanizing the Geeks, which turned out to be a more polarizing title than I was expecting, because I would describe myself as a geek in a very non-judgmental, proud way. I'd say I'm proud to be a geek, but apparently not everyone views it in the same way. So to be clear, this is not in any way, it's just about how to manage tech teams. It's that simple. And also I share articles on my LinkedIn and also host a Softwire podcast where I talk about all kinds of technical topics.
Awesome. All right. So in the show notes, we're going to include a link to your profile in LinkedIn, a link to your podcast so people can subscribe and listen, which I'll be doing that pretty soon. And also a link to your book so they can buy it, because I have a feeling it's a pretty good read.
Oh, thank you very much.
All right, Zoe, thank you so much for your time today. This has been a great discussion. Can't wait for people around the world to start helping